Here we go. Good evening, everybody. It's very good to be here. Mônica, Sara, Tamires, Vicente, Nathalie, Arthur, Eduardo, Raul, Gabriel. Thanks for participating this Wednesday. It's very good to be with you guys. I know some of you may be a little bit tired of the carnival and stuff, but as always, I have some very, very interesting topics to discuss with you tonight, and it's always good to be with you here, okay? Before I start, anyone would like to make questions or something like this? Comments, questions? All right, so I'm going to share with you here my slides again, and those are available in our Google Classroom website, okay? And I'm gonna try and refresh your memory here about what we were talking about last week. Last week we were talking about sociality. Let me write this down here. Let me write this down again here in our chat. Expression, it's kind of a surprising one. So let me write it down here. Sociality. Socialidade. So it's like a characteristics of we humans. We behave in groups, and sometimes you could even say that we think as if we were a single organism. So that's quite interesting stuff. And we have mentioned a few examples of that here, right? I think I shared with you my surprise when I saw myself in a soccer stadium having this impulse to sing the same things that other people were singing, or sometimes to say bad words that everybody, all the supporters of a team are saying, right? Então, eu compartilhei com vocês assim a minha perplexidade em perceber que eu mesmo lá no estádio, às vezes, tinha essa situação de... Deixa eu interromper essas legendas aqui que eu não quero, não. De perceber esse impulso que a gente tem de fazer o que os outros estão fazendo. Então tá todo mundo xingando o juiz de filho daquela coisa, a gente xinga também. E saindo dali, se alguém te perguntar assim, quantas vezes você já xingou outras pessoas de filho daquela coisa? Eu falo, nunca, nunca. Não faço isso, não xingo as pessoas assim. But then again, we are part of that group. We feel like we have a commitment and we have to behave in group or something like that, right? So many of our behaviors can be explained in this way. We can understand the way people behave if we take a look around and see how collectively, what is the pattern of behavior that it is collectively expressed by a group of people, right? So this is quite interesting stuff, and we are gonna talk a little bit more about that, okay? Now, if you think about this for a while, you're gonna see that this concept, okay, sociality, can be described as the tendency among humans to associate and behave as members of a group. This thing, well, it affects our decision making, our behavior, and it has very important consequences for the development of a country, of a society in general. But the main point here is that this thing can works like in a positive way or in a negative way. And we have to realize that. So what's the point I'm trying to make here? Well, I gave you a bad example, right? I told you about how people say bad names when they are in a soccer stadium. That's not something to be proud of, but yeah, it happens. It turns out that people also behave collectively when they are trying to help some community members going through rough situations, right? Think about what's happening in São Paulo right now. So you have all those families losing everything. Sometimes they are losing even some family members, but they are losing their houses, their cars, their, I don't know, their TV sets, their refrigerators. People are losing everything because of the rain and the mud that comes down from the mountains, right? So it's a terrible situation. But you have like lots and lots of people gathering to try and help. And they're not going to make anything out of that. I mean, it's not like a selfish impulse that leads these people to act that way. So it turns out that we are not that selfish. We are not only thinking about our own interests, and we are not always trying to maximize our own gains, as many of our economic models and sometimes even policies they assume. So pay attention to what I'm saying here, guys. As an economist, you tend to think that people are always selfish and they are always trying to maximize their own gains. That's the standard. That's the standard assumption in economics models. That's the way we believe people are when we are trying to develop a policy or something. And it turns out that this is not entirely true. We don't work only like that. We also value reciprocity. You guys know that expression? Reciprocidade. All right, so let me write this down here. This is very interesting stuff. This is part of human behavior, reciprocity. We feel like we owe people something if they do something good for us. And we don't want to be in a position of only taking stuff. We feel good when we can return a favor, for example. So somebody is nice to you, they offer you something to drink or they offer you to help you somehow, and you feel like a little bit obliged to help back or to give something back, right? Now let me just stop and say one thing here, guys. It's coming down here. It's a huge rain here where I live. So please let me know if my connection breaks off, okay? So far, you guys can hear me well. Please raise your hand if you can hear me well. All right, thanks, Sarah.
Okay.
Raul, Tamires, Mônica. Thanks, guys. It's pouring down here right now. I hope my energy sticks in. I mean, it sticks up and I don't have like a blackout or something. But let's go. So, reciprocity, it's like humans behave. We cannot go on assuming that people will always be selfish. You guys understand the expression selfish, right? Selfish é egoísta. É quando a gente pensa em si mesmo apenas. Então, os estudos sobre socialidade, eles revelam que não é verdade que o ser humano é sempre egoísta. O ser humano sempre só pensa em maximizar o seu ganho pessoal. We know that those things happen many times, but not always. We are not purely selfish individuals, okay? We have some situations, some occasions that we value reciprocity. We think about fairness and we care about that, right? We try to cooperate when people have shared goals, and many times we kind of develop like this understanding, these agreements, and they are not imposed to us. They are kind of people trying to live together and, respect each other. So the point should be obvious, but apparently people forget about that. isso deveria ser óbvio, que o ser humano não é apenas essa pessoa egoísta que só pensa nos seus ganhos pessoais. Isso deveria ser uma constatação bastante óbvia. No entanto, os modelos econômicos nossos tomam isso como pressuposto. E muitas vezes, quando a gente desenha a política pública, a gente também toma isso por pressuposto. A gente não leva em conta que as pessoas podem ajudar as pessoas. So, this is like something we have to pay attention if we are to bring behavior economics in order to develop better policies, better programs. Se a gente quer trazer economia comportamental para ajudar a desenvolver melhores programas e políticas públicas, we have to remember that. People are not that bad. You can trust people at least to a certain amount, right? Okay, so this is very important stuff to remember because we are trying to go further in a place where pure economic models don't take us, right? So let's have a look at this thing here. It's like one of the amazing things that I have discovered in this class, okay? The first time I was teaching this class, I read those papers. This specific one is the World Development Outlook or World Development Report or something like that. And I faced this sentence here. I actually brought it here to discuss with you. A key consequence of sociality for the development of nations is that groups and even entire societies can get stuck in collective patterns of behavior, such as corruption, segregation, and civil war. Those patterns of behavior, many times, they serve the interests of almost no one, but people get stuck. Então, olha só que frase maravilhosa, gente. Uma das principais consequências, umas consequências-chave da socialidade para o desenvolvimento das nações é que muitas vezes grupos e às vezes até sociedades inteiras podem ficar travadas num padrão de comportamento coletivo que muitas vezes já não serve a mais ninguém. Which kind of patterns of behavior? Corrupção, segregação, guerra civil. You may ask yourself, for how long people from Palestine and Israel will be killing each other? For how many decades people have been killing each other? They hate each other like they can't stand. They think the other one should be eliminated. And that war keeps going on forever. Some people can argue that, Israel is not there to eliminate Arabic people, but the other direction is true. But the point is that these two societies, these two communities, they are locked in a war that seems to be forever. I mean, it will take no place. They would be better if they could sit down together and somehow find peace, find a common ground, find a way to live together. But it seems like impossible, and it has been like this for decades. Imagina só, gente, dois povos se matando há décadas. A criança já nasce, escuta a história de um tio que foi assassinado na guerra de não sei das quantas, na batalha de não sei das quantas, já cresce com ódio, é ensinado ódio, e aquilo passa de geração para geração. So, I mean, this is a pattern of behavior, and those communities, they are locked in, they are stuck. They just can't get rid of that. it reproduces itself. The conflict reproduces itself. Now, if you look at Brazil, you can see that here we have corruption. And corruption, at some point, serves no one's interests, right? Even people who get money, who, I don't know, deviate money or stuff like that, these people will end up suffering with violence, with, I don't know, lack of safety in the streets, living in a place where, you get diseases all the time. But still, we have like corruption going on for decades. And that's the pattern many times of how people behave. Go ahead, Vicente. You have a comment. Go ahead.
Professor, existe alguma escala que a gente possa usar para essa questão desse comportamento que você já nasce dentro dele? Porque o senhor deu um exemplo aí da de Israel e Palestina, eu pensei numa escala menor, seria, por exemplo, aquele conflito que a gente tem aqui mesmo em Floresta, dos Ferraz e dos Novais, que as famílias já crescem meio brigadas. Eu não sei se chegaria a ser por questão de escala, de tamanho, de influência. Eu não sei se teria se eu poderia fazer essa associação também.
Alô, alô? Estão me ouvindo, pessoal?
Estou ouvindo sim, professor, tudo certo.
Opa, tomara, hein? Vamos ver se agora fica. Teve uma pequena quedinha de luz aqui, mas foi só alguns segundos. E aí a minha conexão demorou a voltar. All right, guys, so let me show you again the screen that I was showing. And then let me try and answer Vicente's question, right? Quando a gente terminou, quando eu caí aqui a conexão, o Vicente estava fazendo uma pergunta. Eu vou tentar reproduzir aqui, Vicente, mas se eu tiver... você completa para mim, por favor. O que eu entendi que você estava perguntando era assim, existe algum tipo de escala que meça o quanto as pessoas estão agindo de maneira mais coletiva ou mais individual? Era isso que você estava querendo saber?
Professor, porque a pergunta era mais ou menos assim. A gente tem a escala de Palestina e Israel, pela escala, digamos assim, global, mas eu imaginei um exemplo numa escala bem menor, que seria, por exemplo, aquele tradicional conflito que a gente escuta muito falar dos ferrais e novais lá em Floresta, se a influência dessas famílias nos membros da família também caracterizaria isso que o senhor falou, entendeu?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, that's a good example too. When you have like families and they are enemies, right? They hate each other. They have been killing each other for some time. They look like they are stuck in that pattern of behavior. And in a way, let me say this, and I think it's not a good thing to be said, but then again, I have to say it. At a certain point, I think we are all subject to the same kind of feeling. You know, I mean, we are not all so eager to I don't know, commit crimes or things like that. But to a certain point, I think any of us would feel like that in order to, I don't know, protect our own group, our own families. Então, esse tipo de comportamento em que as pessoas se associam sua identidade a um determinado grupo e passam a agir segundo as regras daquele conflito entre os dois grupos, that's a very common pattern of behavior, and we see that all over the world. Esse tipo de fenômeno não acontece só lá em Floresta, Vicente, infelizmente. Isso acontece em diferentes escalas, diferentes lugares no mundo por muito tempo. Let me just give you another example that people don't hear about it here in Brazil so often. When you talk about Turkish people and Greek people, there is this huge rivalry, some of it mostly due to the periods of wars that happened in the past, but still you have some kind of, I'm not saying aggressivity, I don't know, people who are very aggressive towards each other, you know, Turkish people and Greek people, os gregos e os turcos, e esse tipo de padrão que se repete historicamente, cronicamente, de geração para geração, unfortunately, this is very common all over the world. So this is like the bad thing. But let's look at this from the other side. Sometimes, even temporary interventions can have large and lasting positive effects on a community. So it can also happen that a community adopts certain patterns of behavior. They are like, I don't know, healthy and they are good, and they reproduce it like through generations. So these things also happen, right? Então, uma comunidade ela também pode aprender padrões de comportamento e reproduzi-las por décadas, padrões positivos de comportamento, de respeito, de atenção. So if you walk Brazil, if you visit every single community in Brazil, you're going to see that in some of them, people are more empathetic to each other than in others. Então, em algumas comunidades, você vai ver um comportamento mais participativo, mais colaborativo que outros. Em alguns lugares você vai ver mais agressividade, mais disputa entre vizinhos. So, people can learn collectively either to behave poorly, bad, or to behave in healthy ways. So, the point is, we can also promote social learning. That's the big message here. A gente pode promover aprendizados coletivos, aprendizados que são sociais e que podem ter efeitos duradouros. The point is, most of the times, policymakers, the guys who are in Brasilia, they underestimate this kind of concern for each other that we have. They think that in order to develop good policies, they have to assume that people are selfish. Então, muitas vezes, na hora de desenvolver uma política pública, esses políticos, esses autoridades que a gente tem lá em Brasília, muitas vezes esses caras subestimam esse nosso interesse na satisfação do outro, no prazer do outro, na sobrevivência do outro. E quando eles fazem isso, eles deixam de aproveitar a oportunidade de que as pessoas mesmo se ajudem. A gente não faz uma política pública para uma pessoa ajudar a outra. A gente faz políticas públicas para ajudar cada pessoa. So I have, like, for example, I have Bolsa Família, right? So what is Bolsa Família? It's like this. The money will come from the government and it will go straight to you or to your family or a family member, okay? So the government will help one person. That person will accept Bolsa Família because they are getting money, right? The person is getting money. So yeah, it's good. It's his or her own interest, right? Okay. But we don't have like a Bolsa Família to pay for people who take care of each other. We don't have some sort of scheme or contract or arrangement in which we pay people to take care of each other. And we could have that. We could promote this kind of services inside a specific community. We know that people care about each other. They live there for so long. They know their family members. They know their parents. They almost are kind of family members too. So we don't consider that as a possibility in order to develop good policy. And in our opinion, that is a mistake. Vou mostrar depois, gente, um exemplo de pessoas de políticas no mundo inteiro que estão começando a olhar para esse lado. Comportamento comunitário que estimulam uma pessoa a ajudar a outra dentro da comunidade. E não apenas a pessoa cuidar do seu, receber o seu dinheiro, receber o seu benefício. All right, so we have a long way to go until policymakers understand behavior economics. I think, in a sense, that's what we are doing here, right? Hopefully, some of policies. Especially men. Hello? You guys can hear me? Sorry, I think my connection was lost again, right? Minha conexão caiu mais uma vez, né? Gente, pior que dessa vez eu avancei, eu estava lá falando, explicando tudo, de repente falei, esse pessoal está muito quietinho, deixa eu perguntar. Quando eu fui ver, minha conexão não estava funcionando. It's okay. Let's try again. If the connection fails one more time, then we're gonna reschedule this class, ok? Vamos tentar mais um pouquinho, tá, gente? Se a conexão cair mais uma vez, aí a gente remarca essa aula, ou então eu faço um material gravado para vocês, que não é o ideal, porque aqui a gente pode interagir. But let's try this one more time, okay? If it doesn't work, we will reschedule the class. Okay, so let me go back here. I was explaining this experiment in Zambia. So what happened there? Well, in Zambia, a very poor country in Africa, well, what happened there was like the British government decided to help out to fight these sexually transmitted diseases, and that caused so much harm to that society, okay? So they said, we have to promote the use of condoms among women. A gente quer promover o uso de preservativos entre mulheres. Não existem preservativos, tem gente que nem sabe disso, mas existem preservativos femininos, né? A gente está acostumado a pensar na camisinha, mas existem outras formas de preservativos que são desenvolvidos para que a mulher use e se proteja nas relações com seus parceiros. Tá, então, aqui a ideia foi falar, bom, vamos estimular, vamos selecionar pessoas um grupo bem específico de pessoas da comunidade que pode ter uma influência maior sobre as outras pessoas. So they chose hairdressers. Eles escolheram cabeleireiras para fazer esse tipo de abordagem. But they couldn't just say, here are the condoms, go ahead and sell them. So they had like a whole class about how to approach, why this thing is important, how can you save lives or you can save people from suffering with that. Então eles não simplesmente entregaram os preservativos, eles fizeram lá oficinas, ensinaram as cabeleireiras como abordar a questão, por que aquilo é importante, quantas pessoas sofrem com aquelas doenças e tal. But they had like different groups of hairdressers. And for some of them, they offered financial returns, financial rewards, okay? And for some other people, they said, no, we're just gonna socially recognize your contribution. Em alguns casos, oferecendo grana. Em outros casos, eles falaram, não, nós vamos dar destaque, nós vamos te dar status. Nós vamos colocar seu nome num anúncio dizendo, poxa, você contribuiu levando esse produto de proteção da saúde da mulher para tantas pessoas e tal. So, after they did that, they checked the numbers and they realized the social reward was more effective than money, than profit. Ao oferecer uma margem de lucro para a pessoa que estivesse vendendo o produto, claro, as pessoas se engajaram, mas ao oferecer não dinheiro, mas o status, a fama, a reputação para aquela pessoa que mais ajudou a comunidade, esse grupo teve mais sucesso na promoção daquela política. So, I mean, this is kind of surprising because that's not what you would expect as an economist, right? At least myself, as a conventional economist, I would say, oh, come on, people will respond to money, to profits. And it's not true. The most effective way to motivate, to engage people with this social policy was with reputation, with social recognition of how people have contributed more or less to that thing. Okay? So, I mean, this is a very famous example, but we have others. This is not the only example. And to talk about the second example I want to show you here, I have to explain to you what is this public goods game, okay? So this is kind of an experiment that has been performed in different places of the world many, many times. So it's kind of a famous way to check how people are empathetic, how much solidarity you see in such and such environment, and so on. So let me explain to you this game. Suppose I look here at Raul and say, Raul, I have to speak with you in private. Aí o Raul vai lá, me encontra para a gente ter uma conversa privada. Eu falo assim, Raul, é o seguinte, eu estou aqui com uma nota de R$100 e eu vou dar essa nota de R$100 para um ou dois de meus alunos. Você tem a escolha. Você é livre para escolher, tá? Você pode ficar com R$100 ou você pode dividir os R$100 com uma outra pessoa. Mas você precisa me dizer, é privado, eu não vou revelar para ninguém, mas você que faz a escolha. Você pode ficar com 50, pode ficar com 70, pode ficar com 80, pode ficar com todos os R$100, ou pode dividir 50-50 com uma outra colega aqui de sala, ok? Alright, so this is the game, okay? And when you play this game, obviously many times people would say they would do something, but in practice, if you are actually giving people $100, $100, they would behave differently, okay? So watch out, because sometimes people would say something and do something else, okay? But in this case here, they were not giving $100. They were saying, okay, you have this cake, or you have this, I don't know, this number of bus tickets, or you have, I don't know, something that you can use, okay? And they say, okay, you can have all for you, or you can split, you can share with someone else. So that was the game, okay? But they were not only trying to check how people behave. They wanted to compare how people behave, and they identified two groups of people, two different groups of people. One group was people who had suffered with the war, people who have lived through wars, okay? And the other one, people who had not lived through such a tragic experience in life. Então, assim, de um lado tem as pessoas que viveram períodos de guerra, conviveram com a guerra. Crianças, adultos, de todo jeito, tá? E do outro lado, pessoas que nunca conviveram com a guerra. E aí você vai comparar. Alright, so here's the point. They ask you first if you want to share it with, I don't know, a family member. If you would be willing to share it with a family member, or with someone, your neighbor, or someone that is close to you, okay? So they ask how much empathetic you are to group members. But then they ask you, what about if you are to split the money or the benefit with someone that is not from your community? Se alguém perguntar assim, você gostaria de compartilhar esses R$100 que eu vou te dar aqui com alguém da sua vizinhança? Aí a pessoa responde sim ou não. Ou você vai ficar com R$100, ou você vai dividir 50-50, o que vai fazer? Aí a outra coisa é perguntar assim, você compartilharia esses R$100 aqui? 50 com você ou 50 com alguém lá na África? Would you split it this way? I mean, if someone that is far away and you have never had contact with that person, would you still split? Would you still share the money? So they were comparing how empathetic you are to your own group and how empathetic you could be to an outer group or someone that is not from your community, someone that is not from your closed circle of friends or family members. Okay? So it turns out that in all the places that they checked this, they saw that people were empathetic, they were solidary with group members. Em todos os lugares que eles testaram esse tipo de teste, eles viram as pessoas sendo solidárias com pessoas do próprio grupo. Mas nos lugares em que eles testaram com pessoas que viveram pela guerra, que passaram pela guerra, essas pessoas só eram solidárias quando era gente do próprio grupo. Quando era gente de um grupo afastado, não era. So it turns out that you end up being more faithful to a close group once you experience violence. I mean, think about this, guys. It's like a social disease. If you expose people to violence, they get more restricted in how large a circle of solidarity they want to live in. As pessoas ficam menos empáticas, menos solidárias com comunidades mais amplas depois que elas experimentam violência. This is a terrible thing to notice, but it is a very important thing to notice. Because we have to remember that people they are not naturally selfish. They are not naturally, cold towards other people. They behave many times like this because they have been exposed to violence. And then it's like you need to rescue that person from this kind of behavior, right? Então, é como se você percebesse a necessidade de resgatar as pessoas desse tipo de comportamento, para que elas voltem a compartilhar, a ser solidárias, a ser empáticas com pessoas do seu próprio grupo, como pessoas de comunidades mais amplas, como acontece entre as pessoas que não sobreviveram, não passaram pela guerra, ou não passaram por episódios de violência extrema. So, you see, the kind of experiments that we are talking about here, they end up showing that people are actually much more cooperative than we think they are. And they check that in different parts of the world. You would think that in Japan, people are more cooperative than in Colombia, but it turns out that that's not what you see. I mean, people behave as conditional cooperators in any place. Most of the times, when you offer people the opportunity to cooperate, in Denmark, in Russia, in the United States, you see these blue bars here. They're saying that the prevailing behavior is cooperation. So when you check that, it is not true that people behave opportunistic. According to the standard economic model, 100% of the people would behave like this. But when you look at countries individually, you see that this is not true. It is a minority of people who are opportunistic, or the expression in English for that is free rider. Free rider é o cara que só quer pegar para ele e não quer cuidar dos outros. É o oportunista. So this is the minority in most of the countries in the world. So they have conducted those experiments in different places with different people. And we end up confirming that people are not that selfish as sometimes we think they are. Okay? Now, I have to recommend here a video for you guys But I don't know if we're going to have time to watch this video together and then to discuss it. Let me see. Oh, it is only 16 minutes. What do you say? Can I share my screen with you here? You can watch together the video. In any case, what I'm going to do, like I'm going to copy the address for this video here. I'm going to put it in our chat here, okay? But I'm going to try and play this thing for all of us, okay? Okay, so I'm going to put it here in the chat, the same address, just in case my connection is gone. You can watch this video here, but I'm going to open myself the video and I'm going to share it with you, okay? Just a second. Okay, wait, let's see. There we go. Where are you? Okay. All right. Let's see if it works.
When we think about prejudice and bias, we tend to think about stupid and evil people doing stupid and evil things. And this idea is nicely summarized by the British critic William Hazlitt, who wrote, "Prejudice is a child of ignorance." I want to try to convince you here that this is mistaken. I want to try to convince you that prejudice and bias are natural, they're often rational, and they're often even moral. And I think that once we understand this, we're in a better position to make sense of them when they go wrong, when they have horrible consequences, and we're in a better position to know what to do when this happens. So, start with stereotypes. You look at me, you know my name, you know certain facts about me, and you can make certain judgments. You could make guesses about my ethnicity, my political affiliation, my religious beliefs. And the thing is, these judgments tend to be accurate. We're very good at this sort of thing. And we're very good at this sort of thing because our ability to stereotype people is not some sort of arbitrary quirk of the mind, but rather it's a specific instance of a more general process, which is that we have experience with things and people in the world that fall into categories, and we could use our experience to make generalizations about novel instances of these categories. So everybody here has a lot of experience with chairs and apples and dogs. And based on this, you could see these unfamiliar examples, and you could guess you could sit on the chair, you could eat the apple, the dog will bark. Now, we might be wrong. The chair could collapse if you sit on it, the apple might be poisoned, the dog might not bark, and in fact, this is my dog Tessie, who doesn't bark. But for the most part, we're good at this. For the most part, we make good guesses, both in the social domain and the non-social domain. And if we weren't able to do so, if we weren't able to make guesses about new instances that we encounter, we wouldn't survive. And in fact, Hazlitt, later on in his wonderful essay, concedes this. He writes, "Without the aid of prejudice or custom, I shall not be able to find my way across the room, nor know how to conduct myself in any circumstances, nor what to feel in any relation of life." Or take bias. Now, sometimes we break the world up into us versus them, into in-group versus out-group. And sometimes when we do this, we know we're doing something wrong and we're kind of ashamed of it. But other times we're proud of it. We openly acknowledge it. And my favorite example of this is a question that came from the audience in the Republican debate prior to the last election.
Gets to your question. The question in the hall on foreign aid. Yes, ma'am.
The American people are suffering in our country right now. Why do we continue to send foreign aid to other countries when we need all the help we can get for ourselves?
Governor Perry, what about that? I mean,
yeah. Absolutely. I think it's...
Each of the people on stage agreed with the premise of her question, which is, as Americans, we should care more about Americans than about other people. And in fact, in general, people are often swayed by feelings of solidarity, loyalty, pride, patriotism towards their country or towards their ethnic group. Regardless of your politics, many people feel proud to be American and they favor Americans over other countries. Residents of other countries feel the same about their nation, and we feel the same about our ethnicities. Now, some of you may reject this. Some of you may be so cosmopolitan that you think that ethnicity and nationality should hold no moral sway. But even you sophisticates accept that there should be some pull towards the in-group in the domain of friends and family, of people you're close to. And so even you make a distinction between us versus them. Now, this distinction is natural enough and often moral enough, but it can go awry. And this was part of the research of the great social psychologist Henri Tajfel. Tajfel was born in Poland in 1919. He left to go to university in France because as a Jew, he couldn't go to university in Poland. And then he enlisted in the French military in World War II. He was captured and ended up in a prisoner of war camp. And it was a terrifying time for him because if it was discovered he was a Jew, he could have been moved to a concentration camp where he most likely would not have survived. And in fact, when the war ended and he was released, most of his friends and family were dead. He got involved in different pursuits. He helped out the war orphans, but he had a long-lasting interest in this sort of science of prejudice. And so when a prestigious British scholarship on stereotypes opened up, he applied for it and he won it. And then he began this amazing career. And what started his career is an insight that the way most people were thinking about the Holocaust was wrong. Many people, most people at the time, viewed the Holocaust as sort of representing some tragic flaw on the part of the Germans, some genetic taint, some authoritarian personality. And Tajfel rejected this. Tajfel said, what we see in the Holocaust is just an exaggeration of normal psychological processes that exist in every one of us. And to explore this, he did a series of classic studies with British adolescents. And in one of his studies, what he did was he asked the British adolescents all sorts of questions. And then based on their answers, he said, I've looked at your answers, and based on the answers, I have determined that you are either, he told half of them, a Kandinsky lover, you love the work of Kandinsky, or a Klee lover, you love the work of Klee. It was entirely bogus. Their answers had nothing to do with Kandinsky or Klee. They never probably even heard of the artists. He just arbitrarily divided them up. But what he found was these categories mattered. So when he later gave the subjects money, they would prefer to give the money to members of their own group than members of the other group. Worse, they were actually most interested in establishing a difference between their group and other groups. So they would give up money for their own group if by doing so they could give the other group even less. This bias seems to show up very early. So my colleague and wife Karen Wynn at Yale has done a series of studies with babies where she exposes babies to puppets. And the puppets have certain food preferences. So one of the puppets might like green beans. The other puppet might like graham crackers. They test the baby's own food preference as a baby, and babies typically prefer the graham crackers. But the question is, does this matter to babies in how they treat the puppets? And it matters a lot. They tend to prefer the puppet who has the same food taste that they have. And worse, they actually prefer puppets who punish the puppet with a different food taste. We see this sort of in-group, out-group psychology all the time. We see it in political clashes within groups with different ideologies. We see it in its extreme in cases of war, where the out-group isn't merely sort of given less, but dehumanized, as in the Nazi perspective of Jews as vermin or lice, or the American perspective of Japanese as rats. Stereotypes can also go awry. So often they're rational and useful, but sometimes they're irrational. They give the wrong answers, and other times they lead to plainly immoral consequences. And the case that's been most studied is the case of race. There was a fascinating study prior to the 2008 election where social psychologists looked at the extent to which the candidates were associated with America, as in an unconscious association with the American flag. And in one of their studies, they compared Obama and McCain, and they found McCain is thought of as more American than Obama. And to some extent, people aren't that surprised by hearing that. McCain is a celebrated war hero, and many people would explicitly say he has more of an American story than Obama. But they also compared Obama to British Prime Minister Tony Blair. And they found that Blair was also thought of as more American than Obama, even though subjects explicitly understood he's not American at all. But they were responding, of course, to the color of his skin. These stereotypes and biases have real-world consequences, both subtle and very important. In one recent study, researchers put ads on eBay for the sale of baseball cards. Some of them were held by white hands, others by black hands. They were the same baseball cards. The ones held by black hands got substantially smaller bids than the ones held by white hands. In research done at Stanford, psychologists explored the case of people sentenced for the murder of a white person. It turns out, holding everything else constant, you are considerably more likely to be executed if you look like the man on the right than the man on the left. And this is in large part because the man on the right looks more prototypically black, more prototypically African American. And this apparently influences people's decisions over what to do about him. So now that we know about this, how do we combat it? And there are different avenues. One avenue is to appeal to people's emotional responses, to appeal to people's empathy. And we often do that through stories. So if you are a liberal parent and you want to encourage your children to believe in the merits of non-traditional families, you might give them a book like this. If you are conservative and have a different attitude, you might give them a book like this. But in general, stories can turn anonymous strangers into people who matter. And the idea that we care about people when we focus on them as individuals is an idea which has shown up across history. So Stalin apocryphally said, "A single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic." And Mother Teresa said, "If I look at the mass, I will never act. If I look at the one, I will." Psychologists have explored this. For instance, in one study, people were given a list of facts about a crisis, and it was seen how much they would donate to solve this crisis. And another group was given no facts at all, but they were told about an individual and given a name and given a face. And it turns out that they gave far more. None of this, I think, is a secret to the people who are engaged in charity work. People don't tend to deluge people with facts and statistics, rather you show them faces, you show them people. It's possible that by extending our sympathies to an individual, they can spread to the group that the individual belongs to. This is Harriet Beecher Stowe. The story, perhaps apocryphal, is that President Lincoln invited her to the White House in the middle of the Civil War and said to her, "So you're the little lady who started this great war." And he was talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin is not a great book of philosophy or theology or perhaps not even literature, but it does a great job of getting people to put themselves in the shoes of people they wouldn't otherwise be in the shoes of, put themselves in the shoes of slaves. And that could have been a catalyst for great social change. More recently, looking at America in the last several decades, there's some reason to believe that shows like The Cosby Show radically changed American attitudes towards African Americans, while shows like Will and Grace and Modern Family changed American attitudes towards gay men and women. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the major catalyst in America for moral change has been a situation comedy. But it's not all emotions, and I want to end by appealing to the power of reason. At some point in this wonderful book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Steven Pinker says, you know, the Old Testament says, love thy neighbor, and the New Testament says, love thy enemy. But I don't love either one of them. Not really. But I don't want to kill them. I know I have obligations to them. But my feelings, my moral feelings to them, my moral beliefs about how I should behave towards them aren't grounded in love. What they're grounded in is an understanding of human rights, a belief that their life is as valuable to them as my life is to me. And to support this, he tells a story by the great philosopher Adam Smith. And I want to tell this story too, though I'm going to modify it a little bit for modern times. So Adam Smith starts by asking you to imagine the death of thousands of people. And imagine the death of thousands of people in a country you are not familiar with. It could be China or India or a country in Africa. And Smith says, how would you respond? And you would say, well, that's too bad. And you'd go on to the rest of your life. If you were to open up the New York Times online or something and discover this, and in fact this happens to us all the time, we go about our lives. But imagine instead, Smith says, you were to learn that tomorrow you were to have your little finger chopped off. Smith says that would matter a lot. You would not sleep that night wondering about that. So this raises the question, would you sacrifice thousands of lives to save your little finger? Now answer this in the privacy of your own head, but Smith says absolutely not. What a horrid thought. And so this raises the question. And so as Smith puts it, when our passive feelings are almost always so sordid and so selfish, how comes it that our active principles should often be so generous and so noble? And Smith's answer is, it is reason, principle, conscience. This calls to us with a voice capable of astonishing the most presumptuous of our passions, that we are but one of the multitude, in no respect better than any other in it. And this last part is what is often described as a principle of impartiality. And this principle of impartiality manifests itself in all of the world's religions, in all of the different versions of the Golden Rule, and in all of the world's moral philosophies, which differ in many ways, but share the presupposition that we should judge morality from sort of an impartial point of view. The best articulation of this view is actually, for me, is not from a theologian or from a philosopher, but from Humphrey Bogart at the end of Casablanca. So, spoiler alert, he's telling his lover that they have to separate for the more general good. And he says to her, and I won't do the accent, but he says to her, it doesn't take much to see that the problems of three little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. A reason could cause us to override our passions. A reason could motivate us to extend our empathy, could motivate us to write a book like Uncle Tom's Cabin, or read a book like Uncle Tom's Cabin. And our reason can motivate us to create customs and taboos and laws that will constrain us from acting upon our impulses when as rational beings we feel we should be constrained. This is what a constitution is. A constitution is something which was set up in the past that applies now in the present, and what it says is no matter how much we may want to re-elect a popular president for a third term, no matter how much white Americans might choose to feel that they want to reinstate the institution of slavery, we can't. We have bound ourselves. And we bind ourselves in other ways as well. We know that when it comes to choosing somebody for a job, for an award, we are strongly biased by their race, we are biased by their gender, we are biased by how attractive they are. And sometimes we might say, well, fine, that's the way it should be. But other times we say, this is wrong. And so to combat this, we don't just try harder, but rather what we do is we set up situations where these other sources of information can't bias us, which is why many orchestras audition musicians behind screens. So the only information they have is the information they believe should matter. I think prejudice and bias illustrate the fundamental duality of human nature. We have gut feelings, instincts, emotions, and they affect our judgments and our actions for good and for evil. But we are also capable of rational deliberation and intelligent planning. And we can use these to, in some cases, accelerate and nourish our emotions, and in other cases, staunch them. And it's in this way that reason helps us create a better world. Thank you.
All right, guys, let me see what you got. What you got from this video. Então, pessoal, a gente tem discutido preconceito, comportamento coletivo, comportamento de grupo. Me contem aí o que vocês acharam desse vídeo. The man's got a point, right? Quem é que gostaria de começar? Vocês estão tímidos, né? Pois bem, então eu vou repetir algumas coisas que ele falou, tá? Então, uma das coisas que ele falou, os estereótipos, os preconceitos que a gente faz, muitas vezes eles são parte de um padrão normal, em que você encontra uma situação e você extrapola daquela situação. Você, toda vez que eu toco minha mão num objeto quente, eu sinto dor. Eu não vou tocar mais minha mão em nenhum objeto que parecer quente, ou que eu tiver a impressão que está quente. So we end up doing that in our daily life. And many times those things help us. They help us. But sometimes they are terribly unfair and we have to look for them. Right? Então ele fala assim, então preconceito, formar um conceito e tentar extrapolar dali para os próximos casos, é uma coisa natural, mas como a gente tem essa tendência, a gente precisa ser cuidadoso, porque aquilo pode gerar consequências muito, muito ruins, muito injustas. Então, existem alguns casos que você precisa estar atento. Then, he talks about two ways on how we could fix that. One of them is like a more emotional path. and the other one is a more rational path. Can you explain to me those two paths? Como é que é a maneira emocional de lidar com o problema do preconceito, ou do preconceito, da discriminação? Qual a maneira racional de lidar? Come on, guys. Exactly, Tamiris. Yes. The emotional way to do with that is to help people extending the sympathy for one person to the sympathy of a group, right? So if you show people statistics about people, some other people dying in Africa, oh yeah, you go about your life. You're not going to even stop. But if you show someone the picture of one little girl who is suffering from, I don't know, famine or some sort of disease in Africa, then you get touched, right? So your sympathy, your empathy for that person may help you behave in a more solidary way to the whole group, right? Yes, I know exactly the commercial about the Red Cross that you're talking about. Yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah, sometimes I even feel like crying when I see some of those commercials. Yes, it's true. They're very, very touching. Yeah. So this is one way we can help us out of this mess that we are in. The other way is the rational one. So what did he propose for a rational way to deal with prejudice and discrimination? Qual que foi, gente, o meio racional para lidar com preconceito e discriminação? It's obvious, right? It is the law. We have to bind ourselves to the obligation of impartiality. So it has to be illegal to be partial. Otherwise, we will feel inclined to help this or that person, people from this or the other groups. We know it is the human nature. We have just to understand that that's not fair, that it's not universal. That's a feeling that needs to be checked, to be monitored, and to be somehow prevented, right? A gente sabe que comportamentos parciais, muitas vezes discriminatórios, são, entre aspas, naturais no comportamento humano. E se eles acontecem, a gente tem que ter leis impedindo que as pessoas ajam daquela forma. A gente precisa gerar a imparcialidade, né? A justiça, ela tem que ser imposta. Por quê? Porque nenhuma mãe vai concordar que o seu filho tem que ir para a cadeia, não importa o crime terrível que ele tenha cometido. We know that. So we need laws. We need to bind ourselves as a society and as individuals. We need to bind ourselves to some commitments with impartiality, with justice. And that's rational. That's good for the whole society. All right, so this video brings in some very interesting elements to the discussion. The link is up here in the chat, and I hope you guys have some time to take a look at it later, listen to it again. It's one of my favorites, okay? Now, I'm just about to finish this class. I just would like to make a few more comments about what is coming. So let me show you one last time here, my class notes, just to say a few words about something. All right, so so far we have talked about prejudice, discrimination. We talk about how people behave towards in-group or members of your own group, and how behave on issues involving some other groups. And we have talked about this sociality, this tendency to think together and to behave together that we have, right? Now, with all of that, we have to bring home some results. We have to transform this in some objective gain, okay? And in my next session with you, I'm going to record it for you. I'm going to talk about mind space. Now, if you translate this expression here, mind space, it would simply mean espaço mental. But actually, each of those letters in the name mind space stands for a specific factor on how to develop policies, okay? Policies that will be more effective, policies made for human beings, okay? So I'm going to be talking about this in our next section, but I just wanted to emphasize this. With all the knowledge we have from behavior economics, there's got to be a consequence. And the consequence is like, we know a little bit more about how people behave and why they behave in certain ways. The point is how we can help people behave in a more healthy way, in a more responsible way. So the knowledge that we are trying to bring here over our next discussions will be translated into intelligence policymaking, okay? Intelligent policymaking. This is our goal, ok? Então, só para terminar aqui, pessoal, com todo esse conhecimento sobre economia comportamental, a gente não quer simplesmente entender como o ser humano se comporta, porque ele se comporta dessa ou daquela forma. A gente quer dar um passo além. A gente quer falar assim, é possível desenhar políticas públicas para o ser humano, como ele é, reconhecendo suas limitações, suas forças, suas capacidades. E daí, a economia comportamental pode ser usada de uma maneira a promover saúde, responsabilidade e tudo mais. All right? So we are going to be talking about this, and I'm going to show you mind space as like an extremely interesting framework to discuss more effective policy making, ok? Então, nos próximos discussões, eu vou mostrar para vocês como que essa estratégia, esse arcabouço mind space é muito eficaz, muito efetivo para desenvolver políticas públicas mais inteligentes. All right? Questions, anyone? All right, thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to stop recording here, and I'm going to be here for a few more minutes if you want to talk to me. Otherwise, enjoy your evening.